Hmm. I usually have kind of conversations with myself. Sometimes I record them. Usually when I record them, I release them. Lately, it's been a little different. But, yeah, the situation with cloning, to help people understand what's happening now, what has happened, and how things could have gotten this way, gotten to this point. And, in that sense, what it means from a casual standpoint, both face value and beneath the surface. So, the idea is cloning has been apparently, certain things I can get away with saying that, but I can't really get away with saying that with this. It's perfected. It was the first groups began cloning humans in the 40s, in the 30s possibly, the late 30s I think, maybe towards the early, I'm not sure. I can't remember the exact number. I throw them around. They get tossed around. Anyway, so that began. You can look into the World War II Nazis, that whole story, which is part of a saga, which goes so far beyond what people are pretty much allowed to know, that it sometimes requires a relatively longer period to understand and mainly to accept what has happened and what's gone on, including the beginning of what we call history, or how we've got here, how we've, what was happening before recorded history, or why there was what happened, and basically pre-flood and there's a civilization, the way to put the words, I think it was pre-Earth, or something like that, like pre-man. I think there's like post or antediluvian before, and then I think that's before, and basically there was a split. There were two civilizations here, and there was a switch over a while ago, but that's another aspect of the situation. The idea is, once you start looking into what has been covered up, you don't have to become a wizard, but seeing what the occult is, what the knowledge with that is related to, and what people have been doing, what it means to them, and how it's shaped history. And then a lot of corruption and sacrifice and things like that, and you realize how civilization has in a way been shaped by these ongoings throughout history, possibly from the beginning. That might be where things began, and some groups went one way and some went the other. There's research what a Yule log is originally. Begin to see, like I said in the previous video, that once you open your eyes to what's been happening, you'll begin to see it's everywhere, and it explains why things are the way they are. Things aren't, it's not so much black and white. It's what you make of it, and there's no real rules for that, and it's kind of what I want to talk about in the last one. I'm not going to directly carry into that now, but there's beauty more. I explained what people would make fun of about a dog walker out there, but in reality, I didn't say the familial ties and the things that concept, that imagery, society and suburban, etc. brings, and the goodness in that, which I want to talk about in, I guess, the next video. and about that ability to regulate the self, the suffering, the enjoyment, the pleasure and the pain, and see how one is connected to the other as a intrinsic property and necessity. It's about self-regulation, and through that self-awareness or self-vision, is seeing yourself. And in doing that, we realize. But without that, without having that mirror in front, we just become like mindless idiots. And so there's a whole process and more to talk about with that. I'll carry that one on probably in the next video. But with this one, it's just the basic idea. So cloning began back then, and there's apparently connections to the Epic of Gilgamesh and the beginning of certain Akkadian god-men or gods that created some kind of beings, a biological robotoid, for their own companionship, and that this may have something to do with, or some kind of explanation, maybe a mythological interpretation of real events that happen that possibly relate to kind of what you would call multidimensional evolutionary, rather automatic changes, but are on a highest level choices and basically experiments and conditions that are entered into in order to create new life. And this process of creating life is, I don't want to say governed, it is regulated. That's kind of not even better, but it's observed, and there's an interactivity between that and the ones doing that and some higher power in the universe, whatever that may represent itself as, which is, I don't really mean to talk about aliens, although what may be unsatisfactory for some, a human conglomerate basically controlling things and regulating the creation of artificial life and so on, might be a likely outcome, but might be undesirable in that sense, especially that people want to be amazed or entertained by reality, and in the same sense they wouldn't be as comforted if we know there are people looking out for people, and there are also people looking to enslave people. It's kind of the mundane stuff that goes on, but regardless. So there are violations that have occurred or are being changed so that it literally didn't occur in the way that it did, because cloning went on. And so I've seen this firsthand, which is that the celebrities or a person of value of some kind, if they enter into an agreement regarding the generation of wealth and what we refer to as fame, or mass attraction, or support and notoriety of masses of people, which is energy siphoning at its core, they enter into situations where basically their genetics are used for recloning themselves, reproducing a biological organism that can house their consciousness, which is routed from the sleeping body. And we've all heard the beginnings of these types of stories, but it always goes much deeper. We're watching how deep it's going to go now. And so the idea is break down the technology, how it's possible to triangulate consciousness, how using a server system that works on energy, holographic brain wave energy, literally artificially created brain waves and neural maps and memories, impulses. It's like routing your phone through a server to connect to a game on the internet or something like that, or a computer using a dedicated server that plays the game, kind of like a crowd or a cloud virtual environment. It's creating a mental virtual environment that wirelessly connects to the brain and reroutes the consciousness into a AI virtual mind frame a new sphere. There's a few different phrases that used around, but a sensory perceptual image of the brain, the map, which is more or less played out in scenarios after insertion or coming to wakefulness or arousal within the body, which requires its own alchemical knowledge to understand how to do that, how to tickle the brain just right to get it to click on with the information data that's being streamed in from the other person's consciousness, that's being filtered through a complicated AI system that's mimicking their brain waves, their sort of walkie-talkie system. But then basically the person will be drunk, but getting them to wake up and realize what's happening is its own knowledge of how the system works, how consciousness works. And then, it has a lot to do with fear and pleasure and learning and certain things, and it's not all horror, and even then, there are safeguards, and it's being used to produce the highest degree of arousal in the sense of consciousness and other ways, to figure out how to use the system properly. You can only do so many tests, and so these are live action tests and live subject tests, but that's the best way and fastest way to move forward. So that's what was happening. That evolved into people being pretty much caught up into this net and being used in these systems for sex or ring fighting or like bare knuckle. Can't think of the word right now. Basically cage fighting. And basically for entertainment, for the highest degree of entertainment. And, there's that buffer zone between the brain of the clone and the consciousness that's being streamed through an algorithmic artificial intelligence system, a matrix, where your consciousness is inside a computer system. So within that, they can basically have a person's mind interact in an entirely virtual system that's also interfaced or overlaid, with the actual physical environment the clone is perceiving. So you'll have a mix of real environment, and it won't be like the modern day, the public versions of, what are the shared virtual environments, I can't think of the word, where you have the overlays of certain objects. You can click on something that's popping up and open up menus and things like that in the Google Glass and the goggles and the things they've come up with. No, it looks exactly as if you were really there, and the person's walking up to you, and it looks as if it's a person. It doesn't look like an avatar or a video game thing. So all of that's been perfected for the most part and figured out, and the key is into convincing the brain to sleep just enough to be aware of to not be aware of its surroundings directly, and enable, more so, not to not be aware of the surroundings, but to enable perceptual, what would be glitches, where you're kind of going in and out of consciousness, getting drowsy, but the machines and the way the system works, it filters it and adds, instead of a glitch, it adds an object or an experience or something. But to have them not so far asleep that they're out in dreamland and they slip away from any type of containment system, and basically the brainwaves go so abstract that it's just, random colors and stuff, and that's not going to do anything. I mean, it could be guided, and those are used as well, but not if you're trying to have a simulated virtual fight or some type of experience, training, conditioning, torture, whatever, that's overlaid. It's very delicate. And so then you have not awake enough so that they're slightly disconnected, but not asleep enough so that they're basically disconnected entirely and can't be manipulated, controlled, or whatever. Read, basically, and streamed through. And by the way, that is related to the alchemical of the symbol of Saturn and the delineation between waking consciousness and dreaming. So you get false realities. That's what that means when you apply it in that sense. You can interpret it in multiple senses and bring out the meaning in different ways. It's kind of like you're holding up a multidimensional shape and twisting it to get different meanings out of it. It's the way that you're filtering light through the system that's giving you the different outline of the shapes and therefore the different function. It's all conceptual, these symbols, and and the reasoning, or at least the map that is developed through symbolism, which is describing real systems. And so that's obviously a big thing. It's a breakthrough that this has been enabled, this is capable, and as well, if people weren't, if groups didn't go ahead and do certain things, we wouldn't be at this level of technological advancement. So a lot of leeway is given for these types of situations. However, there's only so far that can be gone until the system begins to collapse on itself through what becomes corruption, the lack of control, and that's what has to be stemmed. That's what everything is about. Even though it hurts and we want to save everything all at once, it's like certain things have to be brought into check, into the system, or into balance, and so that anything else can happen. And so from there you have, excuse me, brain to machine, or mind to machine, neural telepathy, basically synthetic telepathy, artificial intelligence, or holographically generated, technologically or electronically generated imaging of a brain matrix, a map of memory and choices that give an outline personality, but it's not as much as an outline as it is a type of algorithm or an equation that describes what to do in a variety of situations. And so you have these systems that are basically like artificial minds that can believe that they're the actual person, or that they're just a system that doesn't even have awareness of itself and is carrying out specific tasks or complicated tasks that computers are capable of. And so a lot of people, one main problem is that everybody's been lied to, let alone what else has been happening, is that people have been lied to because what people believe is supposed to be 1,000, 2,000 years in the future has been happening since the 40s up to the 80s, which again goes back to what I was saying before, and this is all a conversation I had in my head where I'm not really talking to anyone, but just thinking about information, and the whole thing was done in about 3-4 minutes, and it's like 20 minutes in trying to get to every point, so I can kind of tell you how it works. But for instance, if I had a data stream system, I could have that few minutes of thinking those concepts, and they could stream directly in a person's mind, and they just go up. And anyway, but the idea is that you look at, so basically they've had certain things since very early on. And there's a whole background history of that, of different groups, where each group came from. These are breakaway civilizations and breakaway space programs, basically, that went into different worlds, but they were different versions of the same place we're in now, if you want to call it that. Which may be all there is. Which is still daunting because it's like a hall of mirrors. Because you have virtually unlimited, or some degree of various, like a matrix of different realities in their versions of, let's say, timelines, if you want to use that terminology. And so it's like, all there is life, but it's like, what does that mean if in each one of them we're ignorant of the overall picture, and we don't know how to navigate in a higher sense? Then we're kind of in a 4-dimensional crystal cube matrix, and we're stuck trying to figure out the exit or the entrance or whatever, maybe the center, any point of it. Because it's without relativity in that system, it's just going to, every way you spin it, it's going to be the beginning and the end and the center. So in a way you create it, but that goes into other kind of alchemical and these multi-dimensional, which isn't a very helpful word, but these ways of utilizing consciousness and mainly awareness to position yourself within this 4D or 5D matrix of combined physical spaces, where it's like a hollow mirror, where it's like a Rubik's Cube with each facet of the cube, both on the faces as well as each individual cube itself being a different picture of the cube, of a whole cube, or a whole room or something. And so we have to figure out how to organize our steps, our pathways, just like the equation to fix the cubes, to solve the problem of those cubes. Although it's maybe not as abstract and simple or complex as a series of programs you can use to twist a series of motions you use for the cube, and you can solve any cube with that series, that equation, basically. Although it's similar to this degree, this idea that there's basically an equation we can move through with our minds, as if you're utilizing your avatar in a video game to enter in a cheat code or something, but you're unlocking certain aspects that have been formally made latent. And a lot of it has to do with emotion, compassion, a balance of these energies, of knowing where the energy is going, of the way the brain works with the organ system, the higher and the lower systems, of energy bodies, which were called psychic bodies, and other terms that they're used by, soldiers, scientists, operatives. It's very serious. The elite laugh at people when they don't understand it properly, and they laugh at people when they totally ignore it. But it's how a lot of this stuff is done. You have an energy body, you have a mental body, a psychic body, a causal body, literally a body that represents everything that's going to happen to you in time, and energy emission that's pretty much floating around yourself, your physical body. And your cells and your DNA can tap into these forms of energy, which are, when it's all put together, it's like a blueprint for the entire universe. But that core, it's in another dimension through your being, and through what you feel, your feeling must be made aware in you now, in order to have the use of that, to have that applicability in this life. It's kind of like you're an artist, and there's art, your creativity flowing through you. You have to capture a stream where it's happening, and it's happening in another sense of who you are than just your body. So it's not like you go to the bathroom or something and it's just direct. It's an abstraction in a way of the mind. But when you can either isolate that or activate it enough to induce visible or viable changes, you can tap into that creativity as power and create art in this world, this physical dimension, this world. But if you just sit there, it's not really going to happen unless, there are other methods that are being used, because again, it becomes convoluted trying to understand it so definitively and succinctly, because it's an energetic process. And so you could say somebody's doing nothing by sitting there, and somebody doing the same exact physical, in the same exact physical position could be basically navigating different realities. But that's another story. But that's where these things kind of come down to. When you see the technological, the physical changes that have been made, operations, inventions, discoveries, and where this all leads into ultimate knowledge of what's going on here, who we are, and what we are, at least on multiple levels. But a lot of it gets excused because we wouldn't have technology or the knowledge if certain, maybe drastic or very forward thinking, to put it kindly, steps weren't taken, and in that sense losses accepted. And then so the ultimate aspect of that is that the place we're in is either kind of, it's about where we are and what's going on here, what the true goal is, basically getting home, and why we're in this situation where there is such a resistance to what seems to be most natural for us, and whether this place is natural for humanity, or what the form that we're in now is actually where it comes from, what happened previously. The idea of genetics and races and There are basically different humans here, different types and from different times already, like prototypes. For instance, they made prototypes of people. Well, if you look back genetically, or even through these temporal lensing devices that can be used to create a specific electrogravitic or temporal distortion effect through scalar emission fields that are generated from electromagnetic field generators that are positioned in a sacred geometrical manner that creates like these toroid effects that creates like ripples in space-time. You can create an orb thing that it bends light, and in that sense it creates an effect on time. And so then if you have a lensing system that's going to look through that, basically shooting a beam or pulling out, kind of like you're looking into the galaxy, but inside of a artificial void space or an artificial dip in the flow of time, and they can look into the past. Basically, sounds crazy. A lot of people that have been watching have already, seen some research and experience and come to their own conclusions, and new people watching will probably, hopefully, be motivated to look deeper into it. If you have no idea, then I don't know if you're going to catch up in time. But you're in a temporal distortion field that you call the universe. So you remake that model and twist it a little bit, and you can look at different areas of the universe through these systems. And that was actually invented a long time ago. And everything I talk about is direct experience, what I've used, what I've worked with. So, so for instance, they look back and see different species. It's like, it's already been happening. Somebody invented prototype humans, possibly for a purpose of war or enslavement or whatever it is, and so nobody can really come down and say, as a higher authority, you can't do that, because it's already been happening. So it's complicated. But the certain aspects of basically people being grown in underground cages where it's been considered more morally relative, however, which doesn't really mean anything relative to what, I have to, extend that phrase, but you kind of understand what I'm hinting at. However, it's really not acceptable, but it's more morally applicable, or at least it's been considered if they have shortened consciousness to the point where they're awake for a short period of time, and then whatever happens, where there's either sex or horrification and traumatization and murder or sacrifice or whatever the idea is, and if it's for them, it's basically just a quick dream, and they're not fully aware. They're in between waking and fully dreaming, so it's as if it's not really happening. And then there's the whole concept of the souls and the bio-mind, the brain map of the human, and basically the connection to the beginning of what we call civilization and soul of God, basically, and many things that ties into that. But basically, there's underground layers with people in cages and in hooked up tubes and things, and maybe they're not people, they're clones, or they're not souled individuals. God didn't make them, man made them, so whatever, that is, but there's it's having an effect, a negative effect, and they're that's not even really the violations. This is supposed to be a 3-minute video, so so basically, how did it occur that it goes all the way up to other worlds being involved? So you imagine you have cloning, and so now you have a soldier force. It's pretty much brain chip controlled, a little baby computer system inside of a microchip that can function as a neural network. And it's beaming through the image of the holographic representation of someone's brain. Okay, well, you trim that so it's just got, commands that can be activated and listened to, and it has very low awareness and low emotional reactivity, or like a constant control system for that, where if you didn't have that, it would be like it'd be like an animal, like a baby in a man's body or something. It'd be very difficult to control. And so, which goes both ways. You have more intelligence and they learn, or you have less intelligence and they are just enough to perform simple commands. It's all been done. Everything you can think of, every which way you can digress and turn and branch and divert, and every possible option. There's some recording of an experiment somewhere where the outcome of those tests have been done, and they're at the next layer up. Where if it's like, if it didn't work there, well, they're years after that. Where it's not only that works, they can have them do this, you can have something do that, and it's beyond it. But the idea is that, so imagine how much power you can have if you had your own clone army. And so that's what happened, and that pretty much destabilized everything as we know it, from governments to nations to cultures and people to every single group that would have power or sovereignty over themselves. It's not pretty much at the mercy, whether known or unknown, of hidden rulers that have unimaginable power. And the best thing for them, or at least for control, is for those that don't even know they're being controlled. And so you would think, like, well, why not have a billion, man army and just run out now? Well, one, you'd have to take on the entire world. Unless you have backroom deals and things like that, you're probably not going to be doing that. But if you do have those deals, you're probably not going to just go all out. It's going to be basically these proxy wars, these mock wars, which is what we see. And as well, even a billion people, everybody kind of came together to squash this villain that's popped up with the supervillain with a bunch of super soldiers. It's probably not going to work unless you use high technology and so on and so forth. And there's a big balance where there's multiple layers, and the highest layer, there are regulations on what kind of technology can be used so that somebody doesn't destroy the entire universe because they have a lust for power. But the idea is that, why would you do that if you could have all the power and use it to create and manipulate and modulate these false sense of securities, and use that to guide the system like puppetry, like a marionette doll, towards the intended outcome? Then you have all the power in the world, and you don't need to lift a finger, really. You just need to use, wave your hands in a certain way and provide an outcome, a perceptual friction problem, reaction solution, and you can do more than an army can do. You can do more in a few generations. And so that's what we've been at. But the idea is that in the beginning of this, there were several groups that popped up, because not everyone's going to have the same outlook. And it's really not even about supervillain outlook on who's controlling what. It's just about why not, and that's what would happen if you have the power. And the other aspect is, once one group gets power to do something, it's very shortly after another group realizes that this is what's happening and begins to backwards engineer recovered technology or individuals and figure out what happens. A lot of people are equipped with stuff that basically causes their body to deteriorate so that they can't get access to their genetics, and it's like a proprietary code at that point. So, but fairly quickly on, all that began to get combined, and new worlds were created. A way to understand that is, now everybody puts all their poker chips on the table and all their cards on the table, but everyone has cards up their sleeve. Nobody's playing a clean game. But they do that, and everybody basically has these types of communal gatherings of like war games, and through that the next level of technology is generated, instead of basically going all out and destroying an unimaginable amount of life or exist in the environment. Basically, it's like mitigated war games or playful absolute destruction and power. So the idea is that you have these groups running around performing these covert operations. You have the cloning technology, the brain-to-machine technology, artificial intelligence, electrogravitic technology, where there are craft that produce that effect of warping time, which also warps your mind. If you were to do that same thing to the field of your mind, your consciousness starts to go backwards in time, and you start to see 10 minutes ago, and then beyond, there's this bubble expanding outward from where you just were. You're starting to open up into different realities. But imagine then you retain something of what happened, and go back into the reality that you came from, but now you change the future of that reality because of information from another reality. That didn't happen previously. You just opened up to a new timeline, but they're causally entangled, meaning something's going to have to happen that enables that to remain or cancels it out. But if it cancels out because, say, some information from another reality that caused the reality in you're in now to change, well, what if the other reality is altered and that information is taken out? Well, your reality is going to become unstable, and you're essentially going to begin to evaporate out of it into the next one down, the next most common possible outcome in this web, matrix of possibilities that we're in, which are actual timelines, actual existences. And that kind of goes into where I was leading into, which is that all of that technology went from one layer to the next until it's beyond comprehension, to the degree of the amount of weaponry, the amount of destruction that can be achieved with a gun. Okay, imagine a ray gun. Right now, publicly they're like big devices that take up a room or more, a laser that can burn through something. Just think of computers. We had that long ago, and now we have computers that are tiny. It's the same thing with stuff like that could, something handheld that could, low-powered relatively, influence a person's mind, create a mind-to-mind link between the user and a target, and influence and manipulate energy that way, memory, whatever, or fry a person or something like that, induce burning and pain, or just create the perception of that. And it's, again, why use all that force and enter into a billion person war with multiple armies colliding, and your chances of success are greatly reduced in that situation compared to if you can hit somebody with a situation where you create the perception of absolute terror or subjugation through pain, and in actuality nothing even happened. You created the perception that their skin is on fire and their brain's just running that over like a nightmare in a sense, and they can't get out of the beams, they can't get out of the perception unless they rewired their mind subjectively or consciously, which is pretty much the idea behind that. But that's the whole point, that everything turned out that way. Why go the difficult path when you can basically get people to do it for you in a way to themselves, or use technology to create a false reality where what you want to happen is happening, but it's not actually happening in the physical sense, and therefore you're pretty much free in a sense of causality or blame in the traditional sense, because it's like a loophole. If somebody caused the perception of burning, do they really burn you? It's a loophole. But people have to become aware of it, because only then can an unconscious or unconscionable agreement be basically struck or nullified, because it's already corrupt and unconscionable, but that only applies when you realize that. It means basically it doesn't work, or that you can cancel the contract, but if nobody does and people go through with it, then it's already happened. That's what it is. And so we kind of have to realize that and make use of that, but that's a lot for a lot of people who are just busy thinking about the next materialistic gain, or worried about the next materialistic gain. We're in a different situation, but that technology, from what can be known and what can be done, what can be created and what can be destroyed, it went so much further out of what we believe would be capable, at the degree that it's to the destruction or creation of entire worlds, entire civilizations. And the point is, that's basically what happened. Imagine you're on a timeline that dead ends and it doesn't really make it, and yet there are, technically virtually infinite other timelines which do. You're not going to experience that timeline unless you recorded that end snippet of what happened and played it back through some interdimensional technology, which has the capacity to store itself in higher dimensional spaces, meaning it could basically bridge realities and timelines, if you want to look at it that way, or universes, by superseding or storing itself in an energetic format, instead of something that can be degraded and broken down, like sand with time. And so that's kind of confusing, but it's part of how it works. And so most people are not going to have that. And so the idea that timelines could be destroyed, that could have already happened with certain people who have traveled from those timelines to this timeline, to these timelines. And that's what has been happening. Civilization level events, extinction level events, destruction, and as a result of that, there's a tension gathered from some higher layer of authority or power, or just simply the knowledge, the ability to create, and that really has the power here. Something outside this time, this holographic projection of space and time, and there are regulations basically being put into place in order to ensure that it doesn't happen again, because it could basically mean the destruction of an entire species to the point where it's as if they never existed. Because, you know, imagine you have that infinite spectrum of timelines or possibilities. Well, what happens when the possibilities of the one that is experienced cancel one another out to the degree where there's no other timelines to jump to, because all the possibilities were kind of used up in this time loop situation? Well, then the end kind of replays itself over and over, and that's just the frozen state that people are in, which has to do with what's really happened here, and the fact that, you know, a portion of the society may have been one that witnessed the destruction of an entire civilization. And until people think about it, in a sense, they're not going to know that, or until information is allotted to make, you know, a memory transfer from an interdimensional computer system as being streamed from the other civilization right before the moment of complete temporal collapse, and is basically making a shortcut, a beeline, a wormhole from that reality to this one. And then people get organized in this reality and so on and so forth. Or that's already happened in all timelines you go to. You look back to the ancient civilizations, you look to other areas, and you see evidence of temporal manipulation, that it's just been happening everywhere, because that's what it is. You don't find a species, a civilization that doesn't realize that. And that was what I got cut off from before, where you have these ancient civilizations using stones and color and sound frequencies, and they're what we imagine would be violating the laws of physics, but they're not. Just like the technology that we have today is not violating the laws of physics. It's just operating in ways that people they don't understand yet, and is largely invisible, largely electromagnetic and computational. And it's basically taking place in another dimension, in another system, kind of like your mind, your internal imagery, and things like that. And so that means we had advanced civilizations in the past. It's always been happening. We're just in this delineation of awareness. We're kind of in a void space, a rut, if you will. And so the idea is that that's kind of how things got so quickly out of hand, in the sense that people today are ignorant of the possibilities and the danger, the threat with the misuse of technology, both advanced and modern day, what we consider modern day tech, based on the way consciousness works, and the preservation of the self, and the knowledge of the self, and the resistance of an automated system that pretty much is attempting to replicate itself through mimetic transfer of information, through human consciousness, through what we have as the media and certain other invisible systems that are basically like an invisible biological internet, which is like a backdoor system for all types of consciousness-based networking that's below the conscious level, that, you know, subconscious information is traded through. If you figure out how to tap into that, how to hijack it and code it with your own stuff, where you can program your own commands, your own identities into the subconscious of people. So things like that have happened. But there's great healing power with that. It's pretty much where the head conversation I had went to. It also went elsewhere. It had a more reasonable outcome. Excuse me. pause and re-go. But yeah, there are non-human entities. The question is whether they've been here, whether they're interdimensional from another universe, basically another dimension, and making physical bodies through technology to be here. Avatar systems, what 2045 Avatar or Avatar 2045 is about, basically. Excuse me. And or whether they've been here underground. Oh my gosh, wait. Or whether they're created entirely from lab situations, genetic engineering, mutations, or whether it's a deviation of humanity from a different timeline, or an impossible timeline, like a shadow entity, where there's all of the above. And that's also the complexity of what's going on. For instance, imagine you have these possibilities in time that you can draw out on a computer system that's powerful enough to simulate entire realities by taking brains of people. Because all you have is brains of people, and then you got objects, inanimate objects, and nature, systems of nature. You can automate those into a matrix, an artificial algorithm, or an artificial matrix that's described through algorithms that can operate on a multitude of facets simultaneously, 4- and 5-dimensional systems that are tied together, happening all at once. Okay, based on different versions of different people's minds, of different realities, of different pseudo environments playing together to get out a specific event you're looking for. All right, well, imagine you have a spectrum of possible super realities or higher dimensional outcomes, basically future timelines, possibilities. Well, imagine you get the computer system to manifest now something from the areas that are impossible, a being or an outcome or a deviated form that, say, by the time this ever occurred in any human timeline, we would have long wiped ourselves out or long merged to another timeline and just would have woken up not even realizing it in another timeline, kind of like we are now. Imagine you have the system draw out the most accurate version of what a consciousness from that place would be, and then you filter that through a clone, an avatar system, and have them, you give them a little bit of power and have them run a show, run a base or something. And so there's like these basically demonic entities that are doing things. Weird stuff, but that's basically where it goes into. And so what I wanted to look at there is how the flow of time, causality, possibilities, higher dimensional, 4- and 5th-dimensional, or 6 and 7, simultaneous processing of information of complete realities through complete simulated holographic brains and natural system cycles, and you get these artificial realities and artificial systems, and you can basically warp the universe through these systems into a projection you never see physically or normally, and from that run and create artificial life within. Or you can manipulate time, or you can access versions of yourself, or you can combine them in the same room and see what happens, or you can have them fight. And there's so many different outcomes and things, and I tell you, it's all been done. It's all been invented. It's part of what happened to bring this universe into creation, which is part of what has to be spoken about. And there's good people positioned to defend humanity, to defend truth, compassion, honesty, self-awareness, and free will. And that's why this information is being presented to you now. The murder, sacrifice, ritual, abuse, eating, bloodletting, drinking, complete enslavement, sexual, violent, financial, intellectual, artificial, blah, blah, blah. All that's being done, all that's been done. Nobody's trying to, overlook that. That's happening. There are good people. That is why this information is coming out now, where you would not have a clue. Period. And it's that way because everyone looked and realized, oh, if that doesn't change, that could be the end of all possible realities, and there's no other places to jump to and hide in. You need a baseline reality, then you can extend upwards from there. Physicality has to be stabilized, otherwise you don't have all the spectrum of dimensions, possibilities and different versions. All that is all mental at that point, or digital, or holographic, virtual, etc. And so it has to be stabilized so they can have these higher dimensional plateaus or virtual environments where it can be just an absolute pleasure all the time. If it's lost, if the balance is so overthrown or so exaggerated, the imbalance, the physical dimension is essentially destroyed, then you don't have access to those systems, and even the people that are abusing the system to get that pleasure don't have access, and it's like it has to be respected to some degree. And as well, you have these differences. You have realms that occurred because of a split that occurred because basically something kind of went wrong with the technology, but it's way harder to describe than that. And what actually happened and why and how is be a whole other video. But we have kind of like a past overlay. Imagine the computer system, there's an error, and you're seeing trails on the system. Okay, remember, or imagine it's not actually visual trails, but it's informational trails where the processes are lagging behind. And we've grown accustomed to it so that it just seems as if everything is happening as it's happening, when in reality we're kind of behind this delay system, and the information's kind of jumbling a little bit. So we have these ghost images, these ghost trails through time, and these are pretty much different layers of the universe: mental, physical, mental, or physical, astral, mental, causal, maybe. Layers. The point is, if the physical doesn't exist, those aren't there. There's just like light or dark, basically. And if the physical comes to full reunion with all possibilities, if the physical universe catches up with the energetic, the consciousness, the heaven aspect, and it all becomes one, well, you don't have those in-between layers as well. Everything's happening here now, and to the point, and we're not basically in this type of virtual delay system as if we're dreaming. Because all it is, we're either awake or below consciousness, and we're in the middle, we're dreaming, we're not aware of it. And so the point is that that's happening because there's this manipulation that took place on basically a digital level of the entire solar system we're in. Apparently, that happened the whole thing. And there's influence on the universe, but it kind of doesn't really. The terminology isn't the same because we think of a space, the universe. Okay, you got this big space. Okay, well, what's outside that? What's beyond that? What about information that's not visually accessible, that's in higher dimensions, basically tucked away at an angle, if you will, is a weird way of describing it, of this universe or this dimension to the point where it would be like an alternate reality, alternate parallel occurrence that's happening all at the same space. It's all in the same space. Why can't you see it? Because there are different overlays, different ways that the information is entangled or fundamentally combined together, and that's not space. These are different dimensions, you would call an algorithm you use to describe certain possibilities and aspects of what's happening right here and now. You can access other possibilities, and they're all happening here, and that's more closer to the universe. It's all time and dimensions and beyond our particular version of time, meaning it's not just a big space, it's a big spectrum of spaces that are all entangled and combined. It's kind of like instead of a bubble, it's a big toroid. Instead of a toroid, it's a big floppy lasagna toroid, people call it, and then beyond that, basically that's our be-all, end-all of what in the physical universe is a polygonal, the primary shapes. I can't think of the word right now. And so everything's kept within that, meaning you can, if you put together all the universes that you could populate in the system and basically figure it out and see them and put them together, you end up with one of those big shapes. That's, so the universe isn't a big bubble of empty space and particles, it's information in that sense. And it's also biological and inorganic. It's the space of your consciousness, of your perceptions, of your worries, of your dreams, of your wishes, of your love and hatred and agony. That's part of the universe too. That's some informational layer within the universe. And there's from there different work, different understanding of what information goes beyond the universe that we're in, or possibly dimensions that we're in, where you have non-local awareness, which is beyond the physicality of the body and is some type of soul spirit link to the system that we're in now. Which, then you have higher dimensional mechanics for how that works, because you have the mechanics of that space, void, time-space system, and then you have mechanics that must be supra, not technological, but super physical, basically, in that sense, interact between the universes. Like you have universal webs and they're bubbles and they're all connected over this web. Well, the space of the information in the web between the bubbles, the intracellular, intradimensional matrix, just like you have cells and intracellular fluid, which is largely saline, and it has, I think macrophages, I think that's what they are. I'm not sure, that hunt for pathogens and things like that, where you have intra-universal and dimensional spaces, but the physics can't be the same. What's in the cells or in the universes has their own outcome, their own tissue, their own work, their own properties, same function or same functionality of the organelles, but they're just arranged in different manners so that you get these different tissues and these different cell systems, these different organ systems. So it's the same with the universes, where in the extracellular or intracellular space, or extracellular matrix, that's actually for, I think, bone structures and other things, you get, there's the different form of functionality, and therefore, in the analogy, it's a different form of physics. You have interdimensional physics. And so there has to be, if there are program codes, you have to have, like in another talk, that you have to have a third language that merges the two together. Within that information is the confirmation or the mechanics of why and who we are. Intellectually and awareness-based information that goes beyond what the human is physically or what the human is to his universe. And so stuff like that has been looked at and uncovered, unveiled to a degree. So it's deep stuff, and ultimately, to see how deep it is, it's so deep. It's so deep nothing matters. Terrible things have happened, and then the creation of universes was figured out and how that works. We could become enslaved, and could also become immortal in a way, and I don't mean through cloning purely, because other aspects were figured out. Genetic, latent genetic capabilities, and so but it doesn't mean that because nothing's happening in that sense that they cancel each other out, that there's no motivation to do anything. It's, if anything, just the same, if not better, because now you can choose what you want to do, who you want to be in this situation. So think about all that. I was like a 3 or 4 minute conversation with myself. It took an hour to get through. I'll try to do the next one, see if it happens again. It takes an hour to get through. I have these basically every day. I didn't kind of rambled and I put like key points here of what happened, but when you look into it and let the extracellular, the intracellular information, the matrix, intracellular matrix of information between what I'm saying and how it's tying together, really kind of soak in and play with it, you'll realize the perspective I'm coming from, which is that it's everything and nothing. You have all possibility before you. You have whatever you want before you in any situation, whether it's comparable to others in one way or another. You still have choice of what you want to do with it. And so in that, there is no limit to the value. It's invaluable in the knowledge of that, in the acceptance of that. It's not all about self-empowerment, because you can empower others simply by knowing. So think about that. Thank you for listening. Hopefully that was some mixture of entertaining, horrifying, and enlightening, if you want to use that fairly annoying term at this point. But yeah, there's always more to see. So it always isn't the best thing because it never ends. But it also, in the same sense, we figured out it does end, because it does begin, and we're in a finite system that you can sit back from entirely and go, wow, that's the whole thing. That's what it is. It's amazing. Where if you didn't have that, you'd just be like an endless maze. So you see, we're in that system, but we're kind of stuck dreaming. And if we're staying in dreamland, it doesn't end until we get tired and fall asleep into a deeper dream that we have even less chance of waking up out of. But that's the idea. That's the system. And through this, we're navigating through the 4 and 5D architecture of this kind of holographic matrix we're in. And through that, we're mentally raising or lowering or reorganizing ourselves to get to higher or lower levels of self-awareness and resonance of what we see and know in these streams of possibilities in that extracellular or intracellular matrix of this hyper dimensional system we're in. And through that, we're moving higher or lower in the system, basically towards the pinnacle of awareness, or out into sleepfulness and away from true generation of self-control, into automation, basically. And so, but we're not, putting ladders up and climbing from one universe to the next and getting in this bubble and kind of jumping out of it and crawling through the extracellular matrix of hypercube, or what is it, like portal space, hyperdimensional space, and things like that. No, you do it mentally and through feeling. But and then physically, weird stuff has happened. For instance, what if you make a bubble ship that's your own bubble universe and you pop into that matrix? Weird stuff happens. I'll bring that up in the next one or so.